Hi. Let me set. Okay. So slowly, gosh, I have something on my screen. Sorry, guys. Slowly, getting back to normal. uh, just one day at a time, and reminding myself that I did everything in my power, just as an American citizen, to report the people who committed crimes against me, who were at threat of committing crimes against my nieces and other children I cared for, and then moving forward to protect my own children because I still deserve a family and a life of my own. And yeah, and I'm just keeping that in perspective because it's it's like when you go to hell and back, it's you're put in like a survival mode. And so to come back to normal and to restructure on what you're defending in the first place. So my freedom, my sovereignty, the protection of my children, um, that's all like foreign to me. And I'm having to re uh, resurface, I guess, all that intent. And then just like remember who I was before the just hellish trauma since reporting first in 2016, and then trying to move forward and keep that consistent and keep learning about trafficking. And again, I'm just really thankful to Deliver Fund and the Cleared Hot podcast for providing the reality, being the only news coverage, the only organization admitting how catastrophic the American sex trafficking is currently, what it's been, and how much they're still learning too. And so it's been quite a journey, and I'm grateful that I reached out to them and feel like I have gotten answers at least through the news coverage on Cleared Hot podcast when he does that coverage with Deliver Fund and other people who've talked about trafficking Kara Smith, and just really that it's completely normal, and no police department is able at all to handle the reality. Again, none of the apps ever required IDs, and they still don't today. So that's a super simple fact. I'll just put a pin in that there. Yeah, so I'm getting back to myself. Started the morning just like I would before when I was just like keeping myself in a state of absolute bliss, like hours of yoga a day. And so and too much of that, I mean, because you have to leave the bliss to do the battle. And like if you are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, and I haven't read it, just familiar through like the training I did and like learning the concepts and like Indian history and kind of that culture, as far as what it looked like to I guess like control narrative as a yogi, because again they had massive empires that it's kind of interesting, like the history of yoga. And then you had this like pull for wealth in huge cities throughout like thousands of years in India. And so I'm not quite sure what part of the Bhagavad Gita talks about warfare, but I know that was a part like people would like build up to that, and it's sort of like the madness of enlightenment. And so I ran into one of my instructors, Terry, at Yoga North, which I still would wholly recommend. It's a great yoga studio, and they take it very seriously, including like the history and the living the life of the practice and having it be embedded in how you live, and not just how you can do postures in a class. And the teachers are really dedicated to it. So I think that helps. Not all of them are. And then everybody has their own flavor. Some people don't want to use yoga for that full scope. And I love that too. And that's something I've had to reconcile with, is that some people want the yoga just for the postures, and that's fine. And so I told Terry when I saw her, because I just, had said, after the training and I guess my second enlightenment, because I believe I already had that as a child, as I was held in solitary confinement and tortured, and and so having to like really heal my brain from my teenage trauma, I went all the way back to childhood, and then it was like right after my enlightenment, right after this super deep years-long yoga practice, I was back to square one because I'm like, well, I can't ignore this, and I won't ignore it, and I will do everything I can to bring the truth out and try to get the people who committed crimes against me at least reported. And that was all I could do. And then make enough noise to protect the small children who I still know are in that circumstance around those people who are still free, just walking around, some of them teaching kids. So I told Terry I was peppering it in my daily life again, and that was really nice to do. I mainly started my morning with shoulder things. Yeah, and just the Christianity stuff I'm definitely holding on to a lot because I feel like the yoga kind of kept me isolated. So I was trying to just do everything in my own mind and heal within myself. But then I isolated myself, and that made me more vulnerable to re-trafficking, which happened, and more assaults, which happened. And so the Christianity part helps a lot, and just kind of restoring like faith in humanity and knowing to discern between groups of people and just letting like my trust build back with the world that's around me. And I know I'm one of millions in that regard. And so speaking of traffickers, I was watching the Netflix of Harry and Meghan. First, I watched his interview, and again, his uncle still hasn't been put on trial for sex trafficking American kids, or at least being present, and then the court would decide whether or not. But again, he was present consistently on the islands, and in the same social circles as Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. So like, whenever the political parties think it'll be timely to hold the English accountable again in court for crimes committed against American women and children, that'd be about now. So we'll see who brings it back up. It's really irritating. Again, like Project Veritas had exposed like one of the reporters actually saying like, because the Epstein stuff came out while Harry and Meghan were getting married. And so one of the reporters from Good Morning America was caught on camera by a Veritas reporter saying like, oh no, like we can't talk about the American children because Meghan and Harry need a lot of attention when they're getting married. And we would hate to like put a damper on that. So we're not going to talk about the kids who were sex trafficked by royalty around the world. Like, it's just not like a good time for it. So she said something like that. She did say, though, she was like, oh, that's my story. I had that story. And so that reporter as well, who knows what she grew up with in New York, maybe it was just made even so normal to her that she couldn't see like that definitely would have been the thing to stake getting fired on, because you would have had that story and you could still be running with it, lady, but missed opportunity. Thank gosh for Project Veritas just doing their job as real journalists. Anyway, I was wanting to talk about the history of Prince. So it did make me laugh. So first I did the Anderson Cooper Prince Harry interview, which is down below. And it's at one point Anderson goes like, why don't you guys like if you're wanting to start over in America, why don't you renounce your titles and do that? Because you're not working for England. That's what you said. And then Harry goes like, well, what good would that do? And and it's like, oh, this is the only way you can make money because you don't like, what else would you do? You haven't separated yourself because you kept relying on that title and then didn't like build another skill. And like, that'd be awesome if you did like Apache rescue. You could just go rescue people. There's just a flood in California. Obviously, you would be risking yourself, but that's just like, I think after a while, people wouldn't care. Well, no, people would put themselves in scenarios to get rescued by you. So that's like, and you can see how then it's like, well, what good would it do? Well, if you just become yourself, then people would accept that you're just another American citizen that they don't need to give a shit about, but you're keeping a title of dominance. So you're like trying to have your cake and eat it too, which is, we'll talk a little bit about that history. But it shouldn't be that way. It should be like, for example, William, I think, does a bit of like helicopter rescue every once in a while, or he at least can if need be. And he's present to like local things. I think the documentary on Netflix said that they do 2,000 visits a year. So it's obviously like a full-time job, and it's just being present and saying, hey, like we live here too, and we wish success to our community because we're the representatives of this community and we've been a part of that structure, and like literally our safety and our ability to feed ourselves does depend on how stable London is or any part of the Commonwealth. And so that's the job. Simple. Nothing's complicated about it at all. But what you put on it, if you can't get your way and you cry like a baby, which is what he was doing. I think he's a bit autistic. Watching it again, it was interesting because he talked about like not being able to cry. And you can just always tell he's never saying what he wants to say. And so it's kind of funny to also notice just him separately as a person who grew up having to be rehearsed, and then meeting this woman who's like, I don't give a fuck. And he just like is able to say what he wants to say. So it's kind of funny to maybe notice that that part of his brain is just able to develop like a child, like a teenage boy for the first time at, I think he's almost 40 years old. And I'm like, cool. But then you don't need to be a prince. You can just become a citizen and be a Californian kid. Like I know so many English boys, it's just their dream to live in California. I say that because I dated one man from Liverpool, slept with my first year of college when I was in Humboldt County. And that was definitely the vibe. Like, you just wanted to listen to Red Hot Chili Peppers in Northern California. And now you have to go back to the shipyard. That's sad. There should be an English boys exchange program where just a bunch of like kids from England can exchange. Because I don't know, we don't really do that, or it's only in like certain circles. And I think like when the Beatles made like a craze here, I don't know, it was impactful, but then we didn't get to send a bunch of kids from like Compton or Crenshaw back to England. And I think that'd be an awesome exchange program because again, we're birthed from England. A lot of like Black dialects come from Wales in America, like the slang. That was in a video I just watched, and that was interesting to learn. It just really just like the shared history, and then being able to kind of like, you talk about like building identity. Well, like everybody in American society really just comes from English society, just the independent version. and then all the hodgepodging and fuckery that got all in there. But that'd be cool. That's all I'm saying. And then and I feel like growing up, kids, like, something America and England has in common in such a huge way, and I feel like this is so true to say in a general way, that everybody loves textiles. So huge history of textiles. People love fashion and clothing. So really just to like build on that cultural exchange would be really cool. I just feel like a lot of creativity has been snuffed out in our fashion realms, and I don't know. Mainly just doing this to discuss things and kind of rebuild that part of myself when I was tutoring right before I started reporting, and I really feel like I lost myself. So this is mainly therapeutic for me, but I'd love to do a channel with other people in the future because it's important to discuss, and the history, like if other people could raise their children and teach them accurate history, that'd be fucking great because you're not. So yeah, I'm having yerba mate tea, by the way, with orange, a little lime, and some Marquette raw honey. It's really good. It's really nice. I love orange and tea with honey. Okay, so then I watched the Netflix special because Candace Owens covered his book, and it was just so funny. She does a video where she calls him an attention whore, and she's like, she quotes, had somebody in her staff read the book, and they brought out like quotes from it, and you're like, oh, this is a genuine narcissist who's like so narcissistic that he like might not actually know it. And a lot of people in those relationships where both people are narcissists, they feed each other's narcissism, because a narcissist can't analyze themselves objectively, and they can't be interrupted in their narcissism. Like, it's a holy part of their identity. It's who they are. And so that's why like anything that disrupts those narratives for narcissists is like deadly to them, and they will react in that way, and then blame others, create problems, do anything but what they're actually representing themselves as. And so I do love it though, and I kind of respect it because it's Megan in the documentary just doesn't take any of it seriously, right? And then she'll say like, oh, when I went to meet the queen and I was asked to like do like a like, sup lady, she just like I loved it though. She just like does one of these, and I actually genuinely believe that she did that, and it makes my heart warm inside. and she says she doesn't like know, like didn't know the history or like anything like that when she got involved, but I don't believe her, or I just don't believe she's sharing the perspective that she really holds. But this is why like it is something though to be taken seriously. And I wanted to talk about it because I spent $7 to watch the Netflix special. I did 2 episodes. And then with my freedom, I went up the North Shore and had some coffee at midnight on the lake. It was super beautiful. Foggy stars. Yeah, I haven't really got to the English part. I guess I just got, it was just like about the meeting. And then like her being shocked because she hadn't really had paparazzi because her celebrity was like low key. She worked in Toronto, which is a beautiful place. I really want to go up there because there's an Indigenous fashion show out of Toronto. that I did a homework assignment on, because it was just like awesome, just like furs and like super unique regalia. And it was the first time I saw it, like an indigenous fashion show. And so that's in June. And then to see a bit of like what Toronto looked like, I just never looked it up. So it seems like a super great place to be. Yeah, so they just do like a basic, like, this is our love story, blah, 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 blah. It'd be really funny if they like did a satire on themselves. Just saying. So I wanted to talk about like the history of princesses. So when I was doing tutoring through the YMCA, and then I helped, I was a leader for one of the summers. Yeah, and the after school, I loved it so much, and I felt like a failure kind of at the end. For not doing more. So it's called Girl Power. It had an after school and summer program, and it was to eliminate racism, empower girls, teach them financial stability, and just like girl empowerment and like girl focused things and activities. So we had an awesome group, and we were talking about, so this was like 2014. So BLM was just starting, and one of my coworkers like had a lot of personal trauma that she chose to vent out on third graders. Super inappropriate, but she didn't mean that to be that way. And then we got to handle like tough topics as a group, which was good, because if I brought up the UN and I was like, okay, you want to talk about corruption, then we're going to talk to third graders about the fucking UN. And we did. And I felt like, okay, well, I feel like that balanced it out. Like, you want to talk about massive organizations that raise millions of dollars and seem to always just profit off of trauma. It's almost like their market capital is trauma, and keeping that the narrative. Anyway, so I really wanted to be objective when I was leading the girls. I wanted to respect what my other coworkers wanted to talk to them about, and then also what I thought was important to bring up and to get them to consider concepts on. And so one day, one of the girls asked me, one of the third graders or fourth graders, if there were any African princesses today. And I didn't know, so I said, I'll go home and look it up, and I'll tell you next time I see you, which would have been the next day or over the weekend. And so, and so the princess that I looked up that came up right away was, let's get her name, of Lesotho. And this is, by the way, just a place that Harry spent all of his time as a teenager working abroad in Africa. And so that was just one. And then I was like, well, I'm going to carry on that adventure, because then we never went into, and it would have been such an awesome thing for us to do at the time, just all the princesses alive today. Because that was 24. It was 2016 when she asked me that. And then this was when Trump, and then the politics were just like ramping up, and I tried to stay just like, again, like neutral. Like, you don't force politics down kids' throats, especially when you can't explain the concepts you're talking about. And so I wanted to also just focus on what would it be? Like the greatness of all these groups. So like, we're talking about a group that's persecuted against like Blacks in America. Okay, well, you have to talk about the greatness of Blacks in America and of Black Africans in history, Otherwise, what perspective are you raising a child in? Depression and pain, when that's not even true, when there's a whole rich history that you're choosing to leave out because you just want to, like, misery loves company. And that's really gross when people take children into that company. And so talking about like greatness. And so obviously let's talk about people in power all around the world. And then also let's talk about that history. So Miss the Princess of Lesotho, and I have a list down below of the modern princesses, as many as I could find in like 15 minutes of researching. So we have Asia, Europe, and Africa. And then I don't think there are any in Latin America because that wasn't really like a structure. So anyway, you can look her name up below. And then there's modern princesses of Nigeria, still in power. What else was there? South Africa, I believe. Burundi. Oh my gosh. So Ebony magazine, that post highlighted a few specific Black African princesses. I don't know if there was a queen, and that's interesting. Well, why isn't there a queen? I don't know. But the Princess of Burundi, just like silver, like, and I love it when they're echoing like the history of that region. So she just had like medals, like beautiful silver, like Wonder Woman bracelet, like just like you could see the power in her through the photo, like super serious. And Burundi, just tiny country, lots of history. I don't know that much about it, but I just know they make really great coffee. And maybe there's like silver mines. I don't know, but she definitely brought me back in history with her princess attire. And then the other ones, gosh, nothing really notable compared to Burundi. No offense. Lesotho, there's a lot of like farming. I'm not really sure what the princes do, but that's why we're going to talk a little bit about the history and then why in the modern era that might look different. A lot of the European ones had been born in Africa. That was interesting. And then a lot of countries like I hadn't heard of. So that was interesting. And then I have wanted to look this up for a while because I haven't done so, but I was thinking of the era of like Grace Kelly. So early American Hollywood film, Grace Kelly meets whoever the prince is in like Switzerland or one of those countries, and becomes queen of that country. Prior, she was a film actress. And so I didn't realize, and that's what I was like thinking, that this was a real thing where you had many American socialites seeking to become royalty again in Europe after 1900. And so this is one of the articles I found that talks about it. It's Town and Country magazine. Love it. So we have Jackie Kennedy's younger sister. In 1959, right before JFK announced running for president, married a Polish prince. And then what's some other ones we have? Oh, so there's Grace Kelly. Oh, Prince of Monaco. Okay. And then her daughter was on there. It was interesting. Some of the princesses were like Olympic athletes. The daughter of Grace Kelly did like music in the 80s, just like super unique stuff. She was like photographed with a big seal. It was really cute. I wish we would have just talked about all these women in actual positions of hierarchy all around the world. because we talked about like patriarchy and all that, but we never actually got to talk about the reality of the modern era as far as women in power. And so that's unfortunate. And I'm just really grateful for that one student who actually asked, like, hey, are there princesses alive today in Africa? Because I just would have gotten it. I just wouldn't have been able to think about it for so long, and definitely want to study it more. Okay, so we have princes in Greece. So this girl, Chantal Miller. Chantal is one of my favorite names. I have had a cousin named Chantal. I guess until I feel safe, I won't talk to anybody from my family. Okay, and then Chantal's sister apparently also married a prince of Greece. So it's so funny. Then we have Kelly Jean Rondersvet, who married a Saxon Coburg Gotha, which was like the bloodline Prince Harry's actually from, like his grandma, I guess. Won't put that on him as much. One of these was like she had been an Australian and had had married a felon, and then she went and married the prince of some country. Okay, then we have some Arabic ones. So we have Kendra Spears. She was a model, became princess. Her name changed, whatever it is in Arabic, Salwa Aga Khan. She married Prince Rahim Aga Khan. And they live in Switzerland. But they're the prince and princess of, or maybe they have that society in Switzerland. I don't know. Oh, okay, this was the other one who's even comparable to Burundi. I believe they are neighbors, and I didn't know this. And like, way for Meghan Markle to not at all highlight the other African princesses while going and doing Black empowerment through the NAACP and the UN. She didn't shine a light on any of these awesome women. So this one, she seems super great. Ariana Austin. She was a writer and an arts educator, and she became the Princess of Ethiopia when she met Prince Joel Dawit Makon Men. Sorry for butchering the names. He's a great grandson of the last emperor of Ethiopia, and they met at a nightclub. So how cool if their story had shown a light on these other couples who were mixed race, mixed nationalities, and coming from the common world. So you actually have tons of commoners, and she didn't give a shit to highlight any of them. Maybe she will, because they'll need to produce more content to make money, because they still have to go to work. And that would be great for people to see, like, hey, like, see these ladies who also are in positions to do things because they operate in hierarchy in the countries they're now employed under, rulers in. So she's really cool. Okay, so they live in Washington, D.C. Oh, and he works as an attorney. I love Ethiopia. Ethiopia is really going places. Like, they have an awesome, like, farming culture that's grown to tech because they're adaptable and innovative. And so it'll be cool to see that country grow. And actually, I wish they would do more in America if they're living in Washington, D.C., and one of them is working as an attorney. And then you're kind of like, oh, why aren't you in Ethiopia? I think the Burundi woman, she was a model in France, is maybe what it said. And that she had to actually leave Burundi because people kept like assassinating her family members and threatening to assassinate her. So I wonder how many are transplants for their safety. But then you wonder, okay, then why aren't you able to bring any stability, or why aren't you public about bringing any stability back to your country? I don't know. I also put ginger in it. And a lot of them claim, it's funny because America made such a for-profit industry on saying, I'm the first Black this, the first Asian that, mainly the first Black, when I was like, no, you're not. Like one of them had said like she was the first Black model living in France. I'm like, no, not at all. And you're shitting all over like the actual history of the greatness of Black and African fashion in France, claiming in 2023 to be one of the first. No. So what is a princess's role? And so I'd like the basic Britannica story down there. The word is like English, French, and so it talks a lot about just you're born the daughter of the rulers, so the king or the queen. And your future entirely depends. Excuse me. Take off my wool. Your future entirely depends on how good your parents are at ruling, what threats are coming to your kingdom, and what needs do your people or your kingdom have. And so that's why there were so many arranged marriages, because you would want to be quelling a conflict. You would want to be growing wealth and or sometimes at the same time. And then sometimes if you were like, as Harry claims in his book, like despair, if you weren't like the first daughter or the one the other kingdom wanted to ally with, well, then you would be just like, whatever. And so I don't know so much about that lifestyle of those princesses because I haven't studied it. I've only done like a very little bit as far as like the European ones. Of course, you had like some bloody battles where the princesses would then compete for their future of their child to hold the crown wherever throughout Europe. And yeah, but mainly like you are a representative of your people, and your opinion and the way you behave and the way you can get people to get along or get people to disagree does determine the future of hundreds, thousands, millions of people. Excuse me, I blame the ginger. You're also going to inspire trade. You're going to inspire the products people use, as like later after the Industrial Revolution, a lot of these nations became industrialized. It was like, all right, well, what's Queen Victoria wearing? Embroidered velvet. Ooh. And the princes too, like, oh my gosh, the princess and the Prince of Jordan had like their marriage photo in one of these slides. And this is what I've been missing from American men. So thank you to the Prince of Jordan. Top hats, like real, I swear to God, they're like the classic beaver top hat. And they're like dapper as fuck. And listen, this man to me, like, I wouldn't find him attractive except for then when men have this confidence in such a way and then just like can dress like he was very attractive in that photo. I'm not hitting on your husband, Princess of Jordan, whose name I do not remember. But yeah, so like the men would also direct that sort of interest in what they were wearing. And yeah. And then, of course, with the turn of the century, oh, your opinion. Oh, your political opinion. Oh my God. Princess of nothing. Please tell me your political opinion so I can get millions of people to agree to something in your interest. Of nothing. Like the princesses today, like they're not, that's what's different, is they're maintaining, they're covering for, they're hiding behind. And I think that's a reason a lot of them don't come forward. Because why wouldn't you? Except, of course, for like the cultural ones, like the Arabic world, for example. That's a bit different. And in fact, a lot of those women, like they were just like out and about. They look like they're pretty active. But not all of them are. And I don't know, because what the modern world has done to Islam, I can't digest because I've only just kind of digested Islam. I'm still learning it. So I wish they had more clothing companies and sandal companies, because anytime I meet like a bunch of men from the Arab world, not only their clothes, but like their sandals. I'm like, God damn, where'd you get those sandals? Those look super comfy and awesome. Like, please sell us your sandals. Come on. Yeah. Like I said, they're like maintaining, covering for, relying on, hiding behind. They're not building diplomacy, quelling conflict. And if they are quelling conflict, I really question the ways in which that conflict is being quelled. This is what I will say for the Asian princesses. You do you, lady. Oh my gosh, are they hypersexualized? One of the links is like a bunch of modern, so like girls from the island, from Java, Asian countries, super hypersexualized. And that's fine. But then I'm like, okay. I kind of want an audit of consent for all my princesses of the world. God willing. Feminist leadership willing, whatever that's going to turn into. I'm not quite sure. But I would love a convention of princesses, and I would love it to be in the Midwest. And I want to hear your opinions, what you want the future for your countries to look like. I want to hear your obstacles for being able to actually be in your homeland, because that came up a lot, that they did not live in their countries of rule. I want to know how you're making money, how you're building wealth. Yeah. And also, like, it would be awesome to have like a historical fashion show in that way. And I think that'd just be great, because a lot of these women represent ethnicities of girls that live in the US. And you want to talk about like people or kids, young girls feeling not, like they're not represented, or they're not represented in positions of power. Well, how wonderful just to have a convention of princesses and and people be able to see and know that you exist, that you have a job of hierarchy or a position of hierarchy, that you have opinions that you can share, that your country has a centuries that long, thousands of years long history. The Indian princesses, there's an interesting part on Indian British spies. I didn't really get to read that because I don't know anything about the history of Indian British spies, but it looked really good. And well, a lot of the history too, because obviously we don't need to beat around the bush. Obviously, there's going to be betrayal at the beginning of the 1900s in the women's suffragette movement of America. You have what I think the number is dozens of American socialites. So women who are making money and wanted to make more money and never fear losing their power. Ally, so betray America because people did not vote for you to do that. Back to Europe, and then just 100 years later, still have this hierarchy, not want to be mentioned, but somehow you're still making money and decisions for Americans in at least some fashion. So obviously there's going to be a bit of betrayal. Maybe it was set up for you by your parents. That's a story that I'm sure is super common because that's what rulers do. When you're in that position and you have that power, you're going to plan for your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. That arrow is going to be set and marked. But what can't go on is this level of corruption, especially with all the child sex trafficking, with all the trafficking in general. And that's the main reason it can't go on, the lies. But no need to hang people at the gallows. Just I think it's more important for those sort of stories to come out slowly, as I'm sure the sexual trauma in all their families is a reality, as is historical for princesses in almost every culture throughout the centuries around the world. I actually really want to do this. I'm going to commit to it more because these women seem so awesome. Like, when do they ever get in a room together? Megan, do something. Okay, so the one that I have from the history, and this is the last thing I'll talk about. I'm going to go have my lunch here. They were called dollar princesses. So the history article talks about during the Gilded Age, so the late 1800s, the Midwest, Duluth, Minnesota, the most millionaires per capita anywhere in the world, back to like New York society as well. So the Gilded Age, just wealthy. Late 1800s, Gilded Age. Marrying British aristocrats were seen as a way for American heiresses to raise their social status. So how American dollar princesses invaded British high society. And so this woman in this article, I love it. And I love her face and her hair. And she has this beautiful trifolded like Japanese tapestry behind her. When Janine Jerome and Lord Randolph Churchill announced their engagement in 1874, his parents were horrified. The couple had only known one another for 3 days, and Jerome, the tattooed daughter of a philandering financier and social climber, was an American socialite, not a British noblewoman. Appalled, the Churchills tried to block the match until they did the math. I recommend this article because it's delightful, and I'm going to read more of it on my own. But I'll read this one because then this gets into the absolute tyranny and traitorship. So I'm just going to, Between the late 19th century and World War II, a flood of dollar princesses flocked to England looking for love. So they would have been meeting with men from the Arabic world at this time as well. That just would have been their meeting place. In return for a coveted title, and North Africa, they offered their much needed wealth to an aristocracy desperate for cash. This writer, props to you. Along the way, they helped change British royalty forever, including all the neighboring royalties. That's my input because that's relevant. I'll say this again. From the late 1800s to World War II, these dollar princesses flocked to England looking for a coveted title while these aristocracies were desperate for cash. All right. So we do need a princess convention also to just talk about World War II still. And I want to give props to this writer. Oh, their name isn't on it. It was history, the history link I have there. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I had to talk about. As far as for like tribal peoples, I guess this is the other thing I just wanted to mention. For example, where my grandmother came from, so my great grandma native to Yucatan and Jalisco, and she was persecuted for her position. Whatever. I look forward to learning the story, hopefully in my lifetime, because I want to know her full story. I have 2 competing oral histories in my family, and then the actual history of Yucatan it's really hard to find answers, and I've tried. So that would have been more, a little more skill-based. I think one of the stories is that she was like a seer. And then you would be like in the Mayan or Aztec, whatever title you want to attribute to those people in Mesoamerica. Because I don't think that's what she would have called herself, which is why I kind of stumble on that. But you would be dictated by the stars. So it's like, okay, you're from this bloodline, but you're born on this day. So this is your job. But if you're from this bloodline, born at this time on this day, well, now this is your job. And it would just all depend. I'll say as well for like some of the African princesses. I want to say she's Swahili. I don't know. No, that's the language. Swansea. No. Anyway, her dad had 15 wives, and she was one of however many. And so a lot of the times in those scenarios, and that happened a lot where in tribal groups and indigenous groups, you might have more than one wife. And again, those women are doing more because you're working in the elements, you're living more with nature, and there's more work to do for survival and just your life and livelihood in those scenarios. And so a lot of those times it's like, that's when like the individuality comes out. So like Ninga of Angola, the Queen of Angola in the 1500s, part of the reason she was able to become queen is because she chose to compete against her cousins, other women in her family competing for the throne. She chose to do that. So she was the daughter of the king. I don't think she would have been the only one, hence the competition and why it was so bloody. She massacred hundreds of thousands of people competing for her position with their people from various parts of Angola and Congo. And so a lot of those times in those groups where that position isn't defined, that's when the individual defines their position, and that's why they get remembered in history. So this one daughter of 15, no, she was one of 32. Her dad had 15 wives. So she was one of 32. Her dad had 15 wives, and she had like her picture up, just like gorgeous, super individual, like look, like she had the blue eyeshadow and just like super teased hair. And so she's notable of those 32, it seems, because she made herself notable. And so I just wanted to mention that as well. All right. Well, this was really fun, and it felt good to get back to how I normally like to teach and to discuss things. because I've had such a sour attitude in my other videos. So this was definitely more enjoyable. And I really do hope we have a convention of princesses from the modern era to talk about history and modern events in America. And I think the Midwest would be super fun place to have it.